quite soon that it will be possible to have full house again. One thing that I think we're still worried about is how is it going to have a startup? It's not just opening the door and pretending that everything is going to be like it was before, because it never will. I don't think it ever will. But I think we are facing a new possibility and a new set of possibilities to create the opera world again. And we have talked a lot about also the connection with the society and the importance now the next coming 3, 4, 5 years to make a statement how important the art of opera and ballet, of course, some houses we have also ballet, that the importance of communicate and being a strong part in rebuilding the society. So I hope those 2 days now is going to give us a lot of inspiration and looking ahead, looking forward, not having to pull back again and to start. We have reflections on what we have learned, what we have experienced. And I think those are, from the positive side, those are the things that we can bring now into the future and develop even more and even stronger. So I'm just happy to see all of you. And I will give the word to Nicholas, and also saying welcome again, and really get involved in all our panels during those 2 days as much as you possibly can. Nicholas, the word to you.
Thank you, Birgitta. For those of you desperate to meet again in person, I promise you we're working on it and have plans for the autumn. And we will lift the veil a little bit tomorrow at the General Assembly about what those plans are. For those of you who prefer not to travel, this is a wonderful opportunity to do it online. And just because of restrictions, life doesn't stop. We need to carry on planning, and some of the issues affecting us have become more urgent rather than less during the last 18 months. Among them, you will notice from this program, are co-productions. Should we still be making them, and what will they look like in future? Our buildings, what will they be like? The fate of young artistic talent, what are we doing to secure it? And in particular, those new imperatives that not just opera companies, but the arts generally are going to have to address for the future, which are the subject of our big Next Stage initiative, about which more in the autumn. But we want to start with the whole green field, because it affects productions and it affects buildings and it affects our lives in many ways. So I'm especially pleased that for our keynote speaker today, we have Patrick Dillon. And I'm especially pleased that Paddy comes from outside the bubble of opera. It's not that he's uninterested in opera and he's been involved in making cultural buildings and opera houses. He is an architect, but he is also a writer, and he is actually the curator of the ITEAC quadrennial conference, which will take place next year. So I think he's in a particularly good position to cast an objective outside eye on this issue. And in particular, he has been the driving force behind Theatre Green Book, which has already made huge strides about how to make productions greener and more sustainable in the future. So I would like now to introduce Paddy and to hear from him as a stimulation for our discussions later.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. Thanks, Birgitta, and thank you to all of you for coming. Now, I'm not here to tell all of you that we're living through a climate emergency. You know that at least as well as I do. We've known it for 30 years. And it's clear now that the climate emergency is going to change the parameters of everything that we do, how we live, how we travel, how we work, even how we eat, and certainly how we make art. In the probably 200 or 300 conversations that I've had as we've prepared the Theatre Green Book, I don't think anyone has asked me why we're doing it, because we know exactly why we're doing it, so that the art forms that we love and feel so passionate about can survive and can continue and be part of the world that is grappling with the emergency that we face. Nobody's ever asked me why, but the question that I've heard time and again has been, where do we start? What matters most? Is it the production on stage? Is it the lights in the front of house? Is it the travel of our lorries or of the artists coming to work with us? What matters most? What should I do first, and what can I leave to one side? And it was from that question, it was an attempt to answer that question, that we began the Theatre Green Book initiative, initially in the UK, but now increasingly internationally. At the very outset, we divided it into 3 headings, and they will be the 3 volumes of the Theatre Green Book. One was to tackle the productions that go onto stages. How can we produce shows, operas, plays, ballets more sustainably? The second will be about how to make our buildings more sustainable. Our buildings, many of which are historic, most of which are old, very few of which are equipped to deal with the emergency we now face. How do we make them more sustainable? And finally, how do we deal with the operations of theatres and opera houses? How do we make the front of house, the catering, the offices, the workshops, the dressing rooms, and rehearsal rooms? How do we make them operate more sustainably? We divided the field of performance into those 3 headings. We hired professional sustainability engineers, a fantastic international firm called Bureau Happold, and we started talking. This is last summer, at the moment when theatre makers and opera makers were unable to create work, and you were, because of that tragedy, available to think and to talk and to look ahead. And the first thing we found was that opera led. The first companies who engaged with us in the UK were English National Opera, the Royal Opera House, Glyndebourne, who came on board to support us, to provide expertise, to join conversations, to add in their thinking, their expertise, and their experience. Why is that opera was taking such a leading role in this conversation? Well, I suspect that all of you would have better answers to that question than I do, but perhaps it is that opera is used to thinking long-term. Or perhaps it's because opera is used to asking the large questions. Why does this art form matter so much? How do we persuade people of our relevance? And in this time of enormous change, those questions matter more than ever before. Whatever the reason, opera was there to help us find the answers of how to make theatre and performance and opera more sustainable. So what are those answers? Well, in tackling buildings and making opera houses and theatres more sustainable, that's a book, a volume that we're working on at the moment. It'll be ready in a couple of months' time. And the same is true of how we make the operations of opera and theatre more sustainable. But what we tackled straight away, while you were all available for the conversations that we needed, while we could talk to directors and designers and set builders and technical directors and production managers, while they were all available because they weren't working on shows, we tackled the challenge of making work more sustainably. There were a number of things that we realized right at the outset. We wanted to come up with clear, practical guidance about how to work more sustainably. It's easy to go online and find general guidance, and after 30 years of this crisis, we all know broadly what we need to do. We need to use less, we need to reuse more, we need to cut down on the energy that we absorb in our work. What was needed was an answer to the question of what that means for practical opera makers, people working on shows now. What can they, should they be doing differently if they want to make the work in a more sustainable way? So we knew it had to be practical, we knew it had to be realistic, and we also knew that it needs to start now. We're less than 9 years away from 2030 and the point at which even a 2-degree increase in the planet's temperature will become uncontrollable. We need to move fast, and we need to come up with advice which may not be perfect, which may develop over time, but which you can start using today, tomorrow, as you reopen and as you conceive the shows of the next months and years. And there were 2 things, I think, that we realized were essential if this guidance was to be helpful to opera and theatre makers. First, we realized very early on that sustainability doesn't just belong to one person. It isn't possible for a director to work as they did before and then say to the technical director, please make sure that this is sustainable. It isn't feasible for a designer to design the same set and give it to a set builder and say, please make this in a sustainable way. Sustainability can only be achieved if everybody in that complex chain that makes up a production, from producer to director to designer, the musical team, the performers, the set builders, the lighting designers, the sound technicians. If everybody knows not only what they need to do to make a sustainable show, but what they need to expect from everybody else as well. Everyone has a role in moving the art form towards a sustainable future. I think the second thing that we realized really early on was that we had to achieve critical mass with this work. If every theatre and opera house came up with its own methodology, its own book of rules, its own guidance, its own approach, then it would be impossible for us to move collectively towards a more sustainable future. Theatre and opera and ballet are made by freelancers, by people who travel, people who will join a team whom they perhaps haven't met before to make a new show, and then again move to another city, to another team and work again. And if in each place they find themselves having to learn and to absorb a new way of working and a new set of standards and rules, then we'll never collectively as a sector move towards sustainability. What we need is to develop a shared understanding of what sustainable working means and how it can be done. And only then, when a designer, for example, is joining a team knowing that the producer, the director, everyone else involved in it has the same understanding of what must be done and has done it before on show after show, only then can we forget about sustainability, because then it will be absorbed into the way that we all make work. And that applies, I think, almost more than any other part of performance to opera, which is so international and which works across borders. And there, more than anywhere else even, we have to get to a place where people working in London or New York or Helsinki or Paris or Berlin are all working to the same standards and speaking the same language and can share and collaborate together in making sustainable shows. So that's how we set about writing the Theatre Green Book. We brought together makers of all sorts, producers and designers and directors working across theatre, across opera, across dance, and put them together with the sustainability engineers who we'd brought in to do this, to begin the most fascinating conversation, looking at how work is made, who faces what decisions, how does it seem to a producer, what are the questions that a set maker is having to answer, or a costume supervisor. In the creative dialogue between a director and designer, where are the decisions made and where are the choices determined? And how, crucially, could those be done differently so that the production as a whole results in a sustainable show. We went through that process for probably 2 months through November and December. We were working as quickly as we could, wanting to get guidance out to theatres and companies in time for them to use it on their reopening shows. And we put together a first draft probably in mid-January and shared it with the various theatre makers who'd been part of the process. And the result was extraordinary. We must have spoken to 150 or 200 people in the course of the process, but what followed was a flood of emails and phone calls and contacts from people across theatre, across opera, not only in the UK, but also in other parts of mainland Europe, getting in touch with suggestions, with comments, with advice. We had costume supervisors getting in touch saying that they felt the advice we were given could be strengthened and making suggestions. We had artistic directors and writers getting in touch, suggesting how we could move the advice forward and make it more workable for practical theatre and opera makers. That then took us to what we've now got available, which is a trial version of Sustainable Productions, the first volume of the Theatre Green Book. We're calling it a trial version, but it's completely workable and usable. It's ready for you to start making shows with now. We're calling it a beta version, just like beta software, because we know it's not perfect. It doesn't matter that it's not perfect. What matters far more than working out some ideal system is starting the wheel turning. It's not the last step towards sustainability, it's making the first step so that everybody across the sector has begun the journey towards sustainable practice. We know it can be improved. We know that there are things in it that we imagine to be easy but turn out to be difficult. We hope there are things in it which we expect to be difficult but actually will turn out to be achievable. What does it contain? Well, we have a seminar tomorrow where we're going to go into it in a little bit more detail, but it's practical guidance for everybody involved in a show of how to work more sustainably, how to shift from using new virgin materials and throwing them into a skip afterwards towards a world in which we're reusing and recycling and reducing the energy that we use and controlling the deliveries and the travel that go around a show. Does that mean that shows now will somehow be diminished? That somehow, because of sustainability, we're bound to move into a world of austerity art, of bare stage productions and shabby sets? I don't believe that for a second. I strongly believe, from the various theatre makers and designers we work with, that it's absolutely possible to make complex, visually rich productions in a sustainable way. And it's essential that theatre and opera don't become more narrow, that you remain as ambitious, as creative, as full of ideas as you've ever been, but that we all start to work within the parameters that the climate emergency is imposing upon us. And that, again, I think is why it's so welcome that opera is embracing this initiative so strongly, because opera is complex, it is large, it's visually rich. If opera can be made sustainably, then we can turn to the rest of performance and say with absolute sincerity that all your shows can be made in a sustainable way. That, perhaps going back to my earlier question, is why it's so vital that opera is a leader in the drive towards sustainability. Theatres in great numbers in the UK are starting to come on board to trial the Green Book. That's also the case in other parts of Europe. We had our first show in the other day from Australia as well. And we're really looking forward to getting the feedback from those shows so that we can continue to develop and improve the Green Book. We're looking forward to finding the solutions that you as opera makers come up with. All we've done with the Theatre Green Book is to explain what sustainability means, what it looks like, what it implies, what it is to make work within the context of the climate crisis. The creative answers will come from you. Will it change the aesthetic of opera? Will it create and drive new ideas and new thinking among directors and among designers? Perhaps it will. I, as a mere audience member, strongly look forward to seeing the work that's going to emerge from these new parameters, because I know it will be creative and I know it will be exciting. I suppose the last question, just in closing, is to ask why it matters so much. And I think the answer is a very obvious one, in a way, that we know that the climate emergency is going to change the world in almost every aspect of our lives. We know that the arts will change too, but it's never been so important that the arts must survive and that opera must survive and regenerate as it has so many times before and lead us in the process of moving beyond the climate emergency into a whole new world of work. So the Theatre Green Book is there now for you all to use. I'm just about to put up on the chat an internet link where you can all download it. And I think just in finishing, there's one thing I'd urge you to do, which is to start. Opera, I know, is slow moving because it has to be. It takes a long time to put together co-productions. Shows are planned years in advance. And we know we don't have that long left in which to get to grips with the climate crisis. And there really is no reason not to begin straight away. We hope that we've put together the tools that you can use to produce work sustainably. And I'd really urge you to begin that journey as soon as you can. So thank you all very much for coming along, and I hope some of you will be able to join us at the seminar tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you, Paddy, very much for that wonderful challenge. And thank you for sharing the link to Theatre Green Book. Having already had the opportunity of reading the trial beta version, I can say that I am convinced that it is doable, and plowing through the well-written but quite extensive pages, I would say one of the things about it is that it is very clear about practical things. It's not theory and guff. So I would urge you, those of you who have the time, to attend the seminar tomorrow afternoon, 2:30 Central European time, when Paddy will be joined by Alex Beard from Covent Garden and Sarah Hopwood from Glyndebourne, among others. And we'll be able to go into it in with some examples and so on, which will be of value, in my opinion. But the other thing that Paddy has done in his brief summary now is to set up our two little debates this afternoon, because the first of them is about how we make productions, or what is the future of the way we make productions. And the second is about how do we renew our buildings. So in a way, we are jumping ahead on these topics, which the Theatre Green Book will not publish in full until later in the autumn. Is it fair to say, Paddy, that we are aiming to coincide the publication with the middle of the autumn, when we celebrate World Opera Day? I realise that opera is not the only factor in green theatre, but I think it has the power to become a leader, not the only one. And if we could use the launch of that as part of our green agenda on World Opera Day, I think that would send a strong message, not just to the European opera sector, but to the world.
That's exactly right. We're hoping to have all three parts of the Theatre Green Book ready by the autumn. And yes, on your point about opera, I think it's absolutely fantastic, as I was saying, that opera has is tackling this challenge, because you are a fantastic example. If opera can be sustainable, then almost all theatre can be sustainable. So you're leading the way.
It's one example, because we're so slow moving and such a lumbering elephant. And if we can do it, anyone can do it.
Well, I was actually I was actually thinking more about the scale of the productions.
Yeah.
Yes, if those rich, large shows that are going on big stages can be done sustainably, and we really believe they can, then there is no reason for anyone else to hold back on beginning this journey. That's why opera is so important. And yes, by the autumn, we would hope to have all parts of the Theatre Green Book in place.
Thanks. Look, I wasn't trying to be too apologetic about opera. And I think one of the lessons we've learned during the last 18 months is that opera does not have to be so slow and lumbering and long-term as perhaps we all thought it was. Quite a number of ingenious opera houses have changed their plans, not once or twice, but many times, and have shown themselves capable of being quite fleet-footed. And I think that's maybe one of the good lessons that has come out of lockdown. But if you don't mind, I would now leave the questions on Theatre Green Book until tomorrow. But the implications of it will resonate in the next session, which I would like to seamlessly segue into, if I may, in the vague knowledge that some of my panelists may be there. We've called it, What is the Future of Co-Production? And I have asked our panelists to be provocative, as well as thoughtful, of course, and responsible in every way. I think I should say at the beginning that I don't want to confine this debate merely to the panelists, and I've been helped by creating space by two of them sending in NAs in the last 24 hours. Annalise Miskimmen mailed me today to say that an emergency had erupted at English National Opera. Surprise, surprise. And she would be unable to be with us today. And Pierre Audi phoned me yesterday afternoon to say that he would be spending most of today driving from the south of France to the Netherlands in order to receive his second vaccination, which I would hate to stop. However, as a start, I will just briefly summarize my conversation with Pierre, because it's a topic on which he has thought quite strongly. And I think his attitude in relation to being director of Aix-en-Provence Festival is quite an interesting and challenging one, given the questions I was asking about the future of co-productions in an existential sense. Pierre, lovely man and very ecologically aware though he is completely committed to continuing co-productions. He says that every production in this summer's X Festival will be a co-production, and that he could not have put together the program he's put together without support of his partners. That is partly a financial matter. Co-production contributes to the Aix-en-Provence Festival budget 1.5 million euros. And his business plan would be trashed if he didn't have his co-productions. Secondly, all of them are originating in the workshops of Aix-en-Provence. Therefore, he is in control of making them eco-friendly. And I think that he would regard the Aix-en-Provence Festival as one of the pioneers in Theatre Green Book. I haven't put him in touch with Paddy yet, but clearly he thinks that by being in control of the process, they can make sustainable productions, not only for their own festival, but for their many co-producers. And thirdly, and here I am very much in agreement with him, he says that bringing together the creative teams that he has been active in bringing together is completely tied up with co-production. If you are asking a leading composer like Kaya Sariaho to write a new opera and spend several years over it, it would be crazy if it only resulted in 4 performances at the Aix-Summer Festival. Therefore, the fact that it is co-produced with 4 other, I think, theatres, including Finnish National Opera and Covent Garden and San Francisco and Paris, means that Sariaho's work, not only her work, but the work of the very much in demand director Simon Stone and the singers who are learning the roles, reaches a much wider audience than if it weren't a co-production. That is an extreme example, but it also applies to some of the other productions. For example, the production of the Rimsky-Korsakov Coq d'Or, which was postponed from last summer and which could not have happened this summer without it being a co-production with Opera de Lyon, who performed the dress rehearsal yesterday. And that means that it can come into a busy program in the summer, oven ready, as they say. So from Pierre's point of view, although he is well aware that the world is changing, he believes that co-production is an essential element of his artistic and financial planning. I just put that on the table and will be delighted for those of you to try to pull it apart or question it, although I'm not sure that I will be as good as Pierre in being able to defend it, but I think his position is an important one. May I now move to his successor in Amsterdam, who doesn't have to travel quite so far for her inoculation, which apparently is not available in France, Sophie de Lint, who I know has been one of the real thinkers about how to replan a program in the context of what has happened in the last year. And to ask you, Sophie, how you see the future of co-production. To what extent is it an essential part of Dutch National Opera's ethos? And to what extent are you thinking now along different lines?
Well, thank you, Nicholas. And also thank you, Paddy, for the wonderful keynote we started today. Well, Nicholas, it's very interesting that coming from the Zurich Opera to Amsterdam, I came from a house that was not co-producing so much because felt maybe at that time it didn't really need it for all these new productions, to an extremely collaborative house, Dutch National Opera. So under the leadership of Pierre Audi, has been co-producing with the entire world, the same way Pierre is doing it now in Aix-en-Provence. And I truly believe that as long as opera will exist, co-productions will exist, opera being the collaborative art form par excellence. I would like to jump immediately to my trip to Maastricht yesterday with 2 colleagues of the artistic administration. We took the train, we went to Maastricht to see a run-through of a production that we are co-producing with the 2 touring companies in the Netherlands, with the Reisopera and Opera Zoid. And what we have done the past year, in this year of pandemic, is we have worked very hard, the 3 companies together, to establish a structural way of co-producing for the coming seasons. Why have we done so? Well, I will be honest with you. 2 years ago, when we created the Opera Studio, the government asked from us, please make sure that this new Opera Studio is part of all 3 opera companies in the Netherlands. And that was a very difficult task to make it work. Dutch National Opera being such a large company and the 2 touring companies. And we have not really worked hard enough on it, to be honest. We thought we had collaborations, different type of collaborations, but much more was asked from us. And we thought, okay, now we have to deliver. And we worked the whole year on it to come up, I think, with a beautiful solution. We made a covenant to co-produce in the field of talent development, the 3 companies together. So we have all 3 companies, very different expertise, fields of expertise, but we all 3 scout talents in the Netherlands. They can be Dutch talents or Dutch trained talents. And we all feel it's our core mission to give them this platform. So what happened now is with the structural collaboration, we can be much stronger, benefiting from the expertise from each company, giving a larger platform to these young talents and also thinking long-term for them. These productions will also be presented in the Opera Forward Festival, which gives maybe also a larger international platform. So I will now jump from this way of co-producing that I find very inspiring with the touring companies, because we're really stronger together to support these talents. I will now spring to what we have learned from the whole pandemic year. So a colleague of mine, Jaap, he calls it now the COVID revelations for us. And so the COVID revelations is maybe not a huge revelation, but it has somehow for us been again an eye-opener, how important I think every single company is, the role of our companies in the cultural ecosystem. And that's what we've been really reflecting on during our night train trip, is our role in the ecosystem. And if we listen to Pierre, well, through you, Nicolas, Pierre's of working, I think we are really looking at a very big international operatic ecosystem. What we realized in the pandemic is we first now really have to focus on the local ecosystem. We realized there was a big emergency everywhere. And for us, we made a very strong point to support the young artists in the country, to make sure that we don't have a lost generation, to make sure also they can survive, but not only financially, but really give them the opportunity. So Dutch National Opera will absolutely continue to work internationally and work on large-scale co-productions. They are important, but we first now want to give a big focus on what are the priorities in our own country and the opportunities there. And what we have learned now in the whole pandemic year is that we can really serve our core missions much better that way. So we now at the Dutch National Opera and Ballet, we have a duurzaamheid projectleider, which is a sustainability officer who has started with us not long ago. And she has a very operatic name because her name is Julie Fuchs, like the French soprano. And she's French also, Julie Fuchs. Julie Fuchs asked me last week, what in your point of view will make the opera world future-proof? What is crucial for you for opera to be sustainable? And I thought, well, first we really have to make sure that we work on our audiences and find a way to broaden and diversify our audiences. Then we have to make sure that we give a very healthy platform to the young makers. And the third point was we have to make sure that we can really connect and create a dialogue with society, with our own environment. And we realized that we can do this much better through collaborations and co-productions, starting in our own country, starting with other institutions as well. In the pandemic year, we've been co-producing with film companies, They have an expertise that we don't have. We've been co-producing with the concert hall. They had a superb installation for live stream. We've been co-producing a lot with radio and TV. All of this we would maybe not have done that way without the pandemic. So to conclude from Dutch National Opera, first we think local, even internally, because we are giving big focus on co-productions, also opera, ballet within the company, then local, and then of course, the global co-productions will continue to play a very important role. And as you said, Nicolas, to establish new productions, to establish world premieres, to make sure that they get the best platform to have a long life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie, for your very incisive and thought-provoking responses, and in a way for picking up the ball from Pierre and then running it in a slightly different direction. I like very much your paradox about thinking local and global at the same time, because I think that is one of the big lessons we have learned. And it's interesting that the maybe the impetus for the collaboration with the Dutch touring companies came from government directive, but that you and other companies have made something interesting of it, not only in terms of a co-production, which I hope we will be showing on Operavision in the near future, but also in terms of developing young talent. And I can give you a preview that that will be, without doubt, one of the main topics for our conference in the autumn. And I think what has been done in Netherlands and by the new studio is one of the shining examples in that. I was going to stay within within Benelux anyway, and call on Guy Coolen next. But Valentí Oviedo has appeared in my screen, and it might be interesting if Guy, you can wait a little bit longer, so that we can call on an example from a more southerly part of Europe, Catalonia. Valentí. Is there? Are you there? You're muted at the moment.
Hello. Good morning. Good evening. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Well, I'm going to try to give a general vision about the issue from about co-productions. The fact that during these last two seasons, many opera houses has been practically without activity implies in many cases that some productions or co-productions not released must be released during the next seasons. Consequently, it is possible that we have a period in which the rate of co-productions is reduced because we have several in reserve, but this, far from being necessarily a problem, can become an opportunity. I'm going to give 3 key points that I'm going to develop afterwards. The first one, our finance will be more comfortable. There are co-productions to be released and paid for. And this period gives us time to reflect on how the future of co-production should be approached, in which cases is co-production essential and in which cases is not. When we talk about co-productions, it means I want to co-produce, who join me, or co-produce, it means collaborate, commitment, co-work. We have to think about over the next years. We have to sit on a table and talk about what we want to co-produce. It's not only about me; it's about us. What are we willing to give up as theaters to co-produce? And in this rethinking, without a doubt, the awareness and environmental commitment of our theaters is something that should be mandatory. For example, in order to co-produce with other theaters, should it be an essential requirement to have the corresponding environmental and energy certifications? But let's go step by step. First, I am concerned about the moment when European Union, with the aim of returning to budgetary and monetary stability, demands, how could it be otherwise, compliance with deficit and public debt that for now, due to the COVID-19, have been relaxed. How will the budgets of opera houses be affected, especially those that receive an important part, around 50% public subsidies? I'm not thinking about the next season, 21-22, or even the 22-23. I'm thinking about 23, 24, 24, or 25. Perhaps our budget will be affected highly. And I am especially concerned about those projects related to new creation and new talent. These are the most vulnerable projects. And here, co-productions can make sense. Can 4 or 5 theaters sit around a table and think that 4 or 5 composers or stage directors can be supported by these 4 or 5 theaters? We're capable of sharing generosity and achieving that there are 4 or 5 projects that achieve the commitment of these 4 or 5 theaters at European level? Are we in the Europe that shares creativity and talent? It is in that Europe that co-productions make sense. And finally, there is a point that interests me especially, and that is that you have to co-produce with environmental and ecological awareness. Are we capable of assuming that co-productions have a life cycle, and this life cycle must be based on environmental and energetic awareness? Commitment to reusable and recyclable materials. And at the end of the life of the set, there is a commitment to generate waste and emission zero. The Liceo Opera House has been obtaining environmental certifications ISO 14001 and IMAS since 2003, and energy efficiency ISO 5001 since 2011. For us, it is essential to contribute from our position to create environmental awareness. Not only the values of the 21st century, including environment, should be reflected in what we do artistically, but also our behavior as an institution must respond to this awareness. And just as I point at the beginning, are we willing to assume that to co-produce, we have as a requirement to obtain environmental and energy certifications? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentí. You've made several really important new points. And I think one I'm just going to pick on is this question of being discretionary about co-productions, and that we should be asking ourselves the question, what value does this particular collaboration have? And if we're being honest with ourselves, there have been co-productions in the past which have in a way been the product of perhaps too many drinks at an Opera Europa conference, rather than out of deep artistic necessity. And I think to ask the question, what does this one contribute? And the answer may be, in some cases, not so very much. And in other cases, yes, it really would do in terms of ensuring a new creation. And the other thing I think is, and it's again an interesting paradox, are we being more environmentally friendly by recycling productions or by not sending them on big trucks around the world? And it's a difficult judgment to make, and one that we will have to make in the future. Is Birgit Meyer there? Because I think it might be beneficial to hear from one of the leading German opera houses with their own workshops and ensemble and traditions, and how Cologne envisions co-productions looking ahead. Birgit?
Yeah, Nicholas, I'm here, yes?
Wonderful.
Yes, hello. Hello to you all. Yes, you already said, Nicholas, the opera Cologne has own stage and costume workshops, and the capacity of our workshops enable us 5 big new productions and 4 smaller productions per season. Currently, our co-productions, which at the moment are mainly European partners, allow us 2 big productions and 1 smaller one in addition. And I myself do, and the Opera Cologne does show very positive attitude towards the possibility to co-produce. For me, there are 4 important aspects in the context of co-producing in general. First of all, as you already mentioned, what Pierre Audi said, if co-productions are carefully planned in advance, they may be in total more cost-effective compared to the costs of an own new production, and with the same artistic value. Also, if the premiere does not take place in your own theatre, what very, very often happens here in Cologne, and you are the 2nd or 3rd partner in a row, you have the chance to work on the set production. So you have the chance to still work on the quality. And moreover, co-productions enable a variety of artistic signatures to be shown in one's own theatre. And I think for all of us here, it's very enriching. In different countries, there are different ways of approaching an opera and also different artistic aesthetics in this scenic implementation. And also the choice of pieces may differ. And I find it very, very interesting and my best experience is to have such colors in your Spielplan, productions that you would not do or would not have done the same way yourself. And in our more and more globalized world, it seems obvious to me to connect with other countries and to exchange experience with other nations, especially opera knows no boundaries. As we know, music is the mutual language everybody understands. And in addition, co-productions and touring pieces play a major part in the global cultural and artistic exchange. And I think for the future, that this will not change. The purpose and nature of such collaborations will not change in general. But of course, I, as you asked, foresee some obstacles. For instance, if we look here at Cologne, we had a lot of troubles with all our co-productions. We all lost them. There was a co-production with Cardiac, with the Opera House in Warsaw and Madrid, but Cardiac is not yet ready in Warsaw. There should have been the premiere in January, and here we should have done it in June. So they try to come out with Cardiac in Warsaw now because of Corona, I think in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we don't have it here, but at the same time, we are not yet allowed to play, especially in Cologne. The incidence is still at about 100, and we have to wait until in our place until it's under 50. So this is what we lost. We lost a wonderful co-production with Amsterdam, Sophie, Upload from Michel van der Aar. It has been shown for 20 people in April. It's a really great production. It can't be shown here at the moment, and now we also have the problem to find a new position to show it here in Cologne, because in that case it's a co-production where we overtake the singers and the orchestra, the ensemble Musikfabrik, and at the moment it's very difficult to find a new place for this here in Cologne. And third, we were invited to South Korea with a special production. Over the last 4 years, we did a Ring for children year by year, and now it's finished with Götterdämmerung, which we did here this season. There was a stream. Yes, but we couldn't go to South Korea now or the last month to do all the preparations. So the invitation for August, September, the Gashby was cancelled, and now we are looking for another place next. Are connected with traveling, and they need precise dates. And this will be a problem as long as the pandemic is not over. And the big question will be for the future, how travel activities will be affected by the pandemic. We don't know yet. And also, if I look at this season, we could do all the premieres we had planned that we made in our own workshops and work with our singers here. There were also guests, and we started for the very first time here in Cologne with streaming in November, December this season. And so we had a full program nearly. We had 8 premieres, but only with all our capacities here in Cologne. But again, finally, I want to say, of course, co-productions, I hope, will still develop in the future, and it's I won't miss them, and I hope it will go on. And well, we have to see. Like in the first, what we heard in the beginning. We have to find new ways to make it possible, and maybe something new is growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Birgit. I don't see you as a prophet of the collapse of co-productions. On the other hand, you offer some cautionary tales about how they can go wrong and become unrealizable. It reminds me of the time we were together in Bregenz for, I think it was the dress rehearsal of Stefan Herheim's production of Le Comte d'Hoffmann, which was, as you might imagine, an enormously elaborate show, and the look of horror on your face about how on earth it might be performable in one of your temporary theatres in Cologne.
Mm-hmm.
But you were by then committed to this wonderful show. It was there are considerable problems, and I think that we may have to become more wary in the years ahead. But let us move to a completely different scale, and at last call in Guy Coolen from Muziektheater Transparent in Belgium, but also in the festival in Rotterdam, which showcases an immense range of different productions from all over. Guy, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, thank you for giving the word to me, because indeed, sometimes it's a problem coming from the small or middle scale, but now in the pandemic, it was sort of a relief, because since our structures are so much more flexible, we were able to tour quite a lot in the last, at least since the summer. We've been performing a lot because our productions are a lot lighter and adaptable to things, and we also will start again now in this month to work with the Opera Ballet Flanders to do our Mozart cycle that we did on a small scale with young singers and young actors. It's a new version, and the trilogy will be shown this month again. So it's the first thing that reopens in Belgium. So it feels very honored. We feel honored, of course, but it's also because we can jump into the gap of the opportunities, and that's the thing we've always been able to do. We took a lot of time because I'm also on the steering committee of the independent producers group, and we've seen a lot of the colleagues were able to do things. And we are all dependent on co-productions. There are both two things. Of course, we've been from the beginning, and I'm talking about my producing company, work together with the bigger opera houses in Belgium, like La Monnaie or the Flemish Opera. And I know a lot of my colleagues from the smaller scale envy us because we have two opera houses that are so open to co-producing with small and mid-scale groups. And I think this will remain the future. We need them, and they need us, I think. And we also made with independent producers sort of a leaflet or a program of what we can mean for the bigger opera houses. And I know that was distributed already through Opera Europa, but we can talk about it further, because I think in the future, the bigger opera houses can learn a lot from the small scale, because we're talking about sustainability, but of course, we've been doing that for many years, because first of all, it's a budget question. We reuse things, but we also make things that are more flexible to tour, because we, as touring companies, we have to think about how we do it. We have a small amount of technicians, and but also most of our sets are reused, and also the costumes are reused. And for example, we have an artist in Rotterdam. I'm talking about my festival. She's a choreographer. She's called Nicole Beutler. She wants to do an investigation on ballet and opera. And we found a nice connection again now with the Opera Ballet of Flanders, because she wants to talk about the ecological side of how to run a big opera house, and also to work on the sustainability. And the opera house embraced the idea, and she will be there for 2 years. So I'm very happy that these sort of meetings took place in the last few months, and that it will go on for the next things. So the whole idea of what Opera Europa is talking is not just words, that it will happen, and that we can play an important role in it. And I think many of my colleagues from the smaller and mid-scale will and can play this role. Usually we work on, for us, co-producing is sometimes a little bit different, because what I try to do is make it into an artistic co-production, meaning that we want to bring forward new talent. And so we like to connect younger talents or unknown or lesser known artists from different parts in the world, or in Europe or the world. Because we think it's important to put the local artists into an international context and give them a new name. We could do it with Annelies van Parijs, one of our composers. She was the winner of the first opera Fedora Prize with the Private View, and the next project that she could realize with the Staatsoper Berlin and Volkoper, and together with the Flemish Opera, was the Usher that she realized 1.5 years ago, and we brought it to Belgium now, and the Opera Ballet Flanders did it. Unfortunately, it was unstreamed, but it was shown in four countries, yes. And so it was a very flexible set also, and was done with a local cast everywhere. But it was the same artistic team, the same director, the same conductor, the same, and the artists came from different countries. I think for me, what was important, even though we are small touring, a lot of the artists we work with, they don't like to go for one show to New York, or because we tour a lot worldwide. We were invited to China now with a new production we made for one show to Shanghai, but my artists say, no, we don't do it. It has nothing to do with pandemic, but it has to do with the ecological idea. If they cannot go for a longer period, they don't want to do it, which I thought, of course, was a bit shocking for me, because I thought, well, China is a big co-production partner, and we need the budget to make the realize, but it made us think, and the project will go on now in China, but we took the time to coach the Chinese musicians with Baroque instruments. So we will do it with a local ensemble, although there was not a suitable Baroque ensemble in China, but our the conductor and our musical team coached online, or some of the Chinese artists were studying in The Hague. So it's also a different form. And now we will be able to tour the project, and it will go to 5 different venues in China this year. And we will also, instead of what we usually do, sending the sets on a plane and for one show, we made it that it was easy to remake it in China. So a lot of things during a pandemic, it was already going on, but it helped us realizing this now, and I think this will be the future. For me, also the local and the international, it's already mentioned, Sophie mentioned it, is also important in our work. Most of the projects we're developing for the future now will be with a very small team that is going to tour, and will redo things with a local choir, or even with a different city choir or whatever. Many of the projects developed in that way. So I think for me also, what I see running the festival, a lot of these projects come to me also from different parts in the world, that people really rethought the ideas, and that we share a general idea that we remake with local artists. And I think this is very nice. Also, we haven't mentioned it yet, but there's also the question of the digital. Of course, there's a lot of digital work that we've seen, but also a lot of interesting younger makers make projects that are half digital and half live. So they come with 3 or 4 musicians, and they connect to the rest of the world in a digital form, which of course it's not suitable for many opera houses, I understand, but it's a form of music theater that has been developed, and I've seen a lot of good examples. We've shown some on our meeting last week in Rotterdam, but we'll continue supporting that because it's a new form we didn't know.
Thank you, Guy, for throwing in some really important questions and indeed answers there. I like very much your China example, because it underlines the fact that true co-production is really about sharing ideas rather than about physical costumes and scenery necessarily. And that if you have a great idea, it is kind of crazy today to send a whole lot of people all those that distance for a single performance in Shanghai, when you can transplant the idea with local forces. I think you also answer the question that I was trying to put to everyone. Do you envisage productions becoming lighter and less cumbersome to transport and store? With an unequivocal yes, we've already done that. I'm not sure that everyone does it. And I think that Paddy was kind of saying, no, as a consumer, I still want hugely elaborate productions. I just want them made of sustainable material. But I think that is another issue. And I think the work of the independents in being, in a way, pioneers in this thing is really important. I'd like now to call upon Henning Ruhr, if I may, for his perspective from Göteborg, which I suppose is known as the Sustainable Opera House.
Thank you, Nicholas. I'm not sure if we're known as the Sustainable Opera House, but sustainability obviously has a very high value in our work since several years here. And maybe the best example of that is our production of the ring that we're doing at the moment, that is known as the Sustainable Ring out there. We missed the premiere of Siegfried this year, but we were still able to at least prepare it. So this is one production that we have more in the digital cloud out there. And we're about to produce the Götterdämmerung next season, if everything goes well. Let's keep our fingers crossed for that. So sustainability in that production is actually a good example of what sustainability can also mean from an artistic point of view, because obviously the ring is a piece of how man influences nature or a natural state of being. So it was rather obvious that this could be a wonderful start for the sustainability work here in Göteborg. So that's why we are already past the third stage of this, and we're looking forward to the fourth stage. The work on this was very intense and, of course, applied to very different aspects of the production, mainly, of course, the set and the materials that we were using, but of course, always also the discussion about, how do we do a fire on stage, which chemicals do we use, etc. I just wanted to comment on what you were just saying, Nicholas, putting on there, that it shows also the danger of this whole thing, because of course now for the ring we have been using the same materials for the stage set for the third time now, and of course there are voices also from the audience who said, okay, but we want to see something different now. So of course the thought of reusing things, it's the question, does that lead us to artistic results that we want to have in the future? And it's very tough to bring in a lot of new thoughts now because so many important points have already been mentioned. But just to say, of course, also for our company, the co-production will remain important in the future as well, for all the reasons that have been named already, financial reasons, sustainability reasons, but also just to have a wider repertoire. We wouldn't be able to do so many new productions in our own workshops. So of course we need to continue to bring something in, and that includes also bringing artists in that we wouldn't be able to afford ourselves. And here I think of directors, but of course also about composers, because we need to remind ourselves that co-producing can mean many different things. It can mean the collaboration with other theaters to produce the same project and show it on different stages. But it, of course, can also mean to co-produce and to collaborate with local artistic institutions, that was already mentioned. But obviously also the collaboration with other companies is very interesting. So not only with other theaters, but with other institutions, university or tech companies, etc., to widen our artistic horizon in there. And finally, also the topic of co-commissioning new pieces is something we need to keep in mind here. On the other hand, now we're connecting this so much to also the sustainability issue. We should also not forget that also sustainability can have very, very different meanings. There's obviously the environmental aspect of it. The financial sustainability is a point, but also the artistic sustainability. If I want to be an artistically sustainable institution, for example, the building of a new audience, for example, is an aspect of being sustainable. Yeah, or do I have a production that I only show for a 40% filled hall, for example? Is that a sustainable way of making theater? So that's something we need to keep in mind. Obviously, now the COVID situation has taught us many things that are connected to the sustainability, even though those two things were actually from the beginning not related, as we know, but there are many points where things touch. Now you asked us to be a bit provocative in this, so I actually want to, instead of pushing out answers, I wanted to put out some more questions, or you said paradox. Sorry, my English is so bad. Paradoxes. What's the plural of paradox in English? I don't know that. So, but just as an example, and I mean, I'm sure I share this with a lot of colleagues out there, is that over the past year, we have had so many productions planned and prepared that are now just waiting to be performed. So obviously, if we look at that from a collaborational point of view, that could be a good situation because there is a wide offer of productions being available or concepts being available that are just waiting to be shown. On the other side, we are all waiting to be creative again after all this year. So now I'm pushing ahead of me 4 new productions, and this will take some time until we have shown these all. When I think of the time after that, do I want to do a co-production or do I want to create something new, for example? So that's something, of course, we need to ask ourselves. One thing that Guy pointed out now is the digital collaboration. And that was, of course, a wonderful learning curve that we had throughout the COVID situation. And we have seen how easy things can be to work digitally. And I mean, what we are doing here is obviously the best example that we can bring together a lot of people who are not physically in the same place. On the other hand, if we would do a little survey here, asking ourselves, do we like this or would we want to be physically together? We might come to the conclusion that we are just waiting to actually work closer together again. Are we maybe already tired of the digital world out there? So again, a question, how far do we get with this? And the digital aspects, especially when we look at the last year, we have seen this rise in artistic productions that have been shown online and have been shared with the world on a digital way. And our audience, got used to this and appreciates this. So the question is there actually the artistic need for a physical exchange of production? Or could we just say a production is done in a certain theater and is then shared digitally online? Do we actually need to bring it here? The big question for me always is, especially after this COVID situation, we hear so often nothing will be as it was before. And for me, the question actually is that true? Is that something, we can simply accept, or should we think about it differently? And then I'm going to say in my, well, not too long life, but still there have been a lot of big crises where people have said nothing will be the same as it was before. And we're still here, we're still producing. Where were really the huge changes in the way we were working? And we did something interesting here. We had a workshop with a consultancy company called Kairos Future. They sit in Stockholm, maybe Birgit, you know them. And they're very good in putting up surveys and questioning future development. And they had several surveys now, of course, based on the COVID situation about what the future is going to be. Of course, this is all, looking into the crystal ball. We will find out who's right there. But what was interesting in there and what gave us a lot of confidence is that when you ask people what are the things that we want to carry forward, what we have learned in the current situation, and what are the things that we want to get back to as it always was, you can see that there are a lot of things that are useful to our work that people want to carry forward. So, and the digital collaboration is very high up here on the list, but also working from home, working from distance, which can be helpful for us as well. One thing for sure is that people enjoy not to travel so much for business. But again, that speaks for co-production in a digital way, and to exchange ideas there. But on the other hand, you can clearly see that there's a very, very big wish for people to get back to live events, to get back together, to have physical contact again, and to have real life experiences there. So I was asking myself, so what will actually be different? And I mean, of course, one of the main things is that the financial situation, or I think most of us, and I keep the fingers crossed for all of us, that the financial situation will develop not too catastrophic over the next years, that we will find ways to finance the current situation without too big cuts in the artistic sector. But obviously, that's a threat that we need to think about. So obviously, co-production and producing sustainably will help us in this regard. But already when we look at the question of the travel, which for COVID reasons, but at the same time for the raised awareness of sustainability, will be completely different, at least for the next time. It's still difficult to travel. And we have to question ourselves, do we actually want to travel? And look at several countries now who ban short flights within their country. For example, that's something we need to think about. Do we need to go on tour, for example? Is that a sustainable thing to do? But also, is the star system with the singers still something that is sustainable for the future? Or is it much more sustainable to work with local artists, which again, for the aspect of co-production will be a challenge, because obviously it's nicer if I have singers in a shared production that know the production from another place, so that I don't need to start from scratch when I present it here. The main question, though, to be now the most provocative, maybe towards the end, is that we should never actually lose the focus on what we are actually producing. We're talking about a lot of practical questions in this, but the main question is actually, what do we put on stage? What do we want to produce? And that's more question also to us, especially after this COVID situation. Where do we go from here? Do we continue as we did before? Are we just waiting to go back and produce the next 10 productions of Tosca that we then let travel around? Or is it now the time to see this as a turning point and actually also put different things on our stage? So what is the role of the artists in here? Before we predefine how sustainable theater is, how do we nurture the artistic interest to deal with exactly these questions? So that was a long rant, just to put out some thoughts about this issue, and I hope, we can pick this up in a discussion now.
Thank you, Henning, for your provocations and questions. I'm going to ask you one. When Brunhilde has destroyed the world at the end of your Götterdämmerung, will you destroy your sustainable ring, or do you expect it to be go on to someone else?
It can't actually. It's one part of the concept that you use the same material for all the different shows, and of course it's different for each show. So you can't just go back to show Rheingold after Götterdämmerung. Yeah. The good thing is that we have a lot of recyclable material in there, so the carbon footprint is really low for it.
It will turn up as Fledermaus, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, or in your house to isolate it from the cold.
But before just drawing one or two conclusions, I would like to see if there are burning questions or indeed provocative statements that anyone else listening would like to throw into the...
Can I come with a comment, Nicolas? It's Birgitta here. No, I was just thinking, listening, first of all, thank you everybody from the panel. It has been very interesting to listen to different approaches towards co-commission or having the same production turning around over the world. I have to say, I have to be a little bit provocative, being a former singer. You know the Swedish baritone Peter Mattei? A couple of years ago, when we had a conversation, he had been in a production of Don Carlo. I don't remember what country, so I don't have to mention the opera house. But his spontaneous comment up on that was, I said, but how was it? And he looked at me and he said, what do you think? It's production who is made for somebody else from the very beginning. I just have to inherit what was made from the very first start. I'm a totally different person as an artist, but I had to go along with the concept. And I thought that was sort of an interesting comment because, of course, I mean, we do adapt, that's for sure. We change. Every director do changes due to the artist you have in front of you. But it was a little bit of a thoughtful thing to reflect on. Is that a feeling that might have been gone around for some time for different artists, that they were facing the fact that this is the concept, this is what I have to do now? That was just a comment. My question was, if we are co-producing into the future, and the more we might do that, does it have some kind of an impact of the fact that we might not need workshops connected to every single opera house? Because we already know that there has been theaters, for example, in Berlin. We know that there is a company who are actually producing everything for the opera houses and the theaters in Berlin. We have it in Copenhagen. We have it in different countries all over the world. And I will put this as a question, but also there might be part of a concern also when it comes to different parts of producing a set and different kinds of expertise that I was wondering, are we afraid of losing something? And do you think that it might be the possibility that we are actually reducing the workshops that we have in numbers today?
I think it's very possible. Our job isn't simply to preserve everything as it was, although it would be sad to lose certain crafts. I think it's a question that it might be well worth bringing up in the seminar tomorrow, where Emma Wilson from Covent Garden's technical department will also be there. And I know that they've had quite a major rethink about their production facilities during this last year. So it might be worth asking that question of those in the front line. But it's an uncomfortable thing, but different skills are likely to be needed, aren't they? I think that's enough to say. Other questions? Did I see Anna Mayo raising her hand, or was that just wanting to stretch? Any others?
Nicholas, could I come in here just for a moment, please?
Mary, please, quickly, before you disappear.
No, I'm not disappearing just yet. There are a number of things. One of the things I think that is obviously a critical issue, that obviously things we hope we're going to embrace all the things we've learned over the last couple of years. I think it's extremely important that we start to be very careful about how we're training directors, in that our young directors coming up, and there are some shining examples. I mean, we did the Tito, which you will see on Opera Vision, I think on the 29th, Radula Gaetanu, when she realized she couldn't do the production as it was originally envisaged, went straight into a completely different mode and actually did something quite extraordinary, which involved, all kinds of complications. She couldn't even come to Bergen. She directed from London. The chorus were in the basement, all kinds of things. But nevertheless, she is a young director who is absolutely embracing all the difficulties that we've had and really taking them forward into creating new and much more flexible and environmentally proper productions. So I think this issue about how our young directors are being trained going forward, the people, the older generation who are encouraging the young directions, have a tremendous responsibility to absorb everything that's been happening. The other thing I would say is that I think by virtue of our flexibility, I think a lot of the smaller companies, and Guy has touched on this as well, of course, we have had the flexibility to really lead because we're not running huge institutions. And I think that learning is really, really important. And one thing I would dearly love to see is an Opera Europa conference run by the smaller companies. Now, obviously, there's an issue of venue there, but I think there are so many of us who've been doing seriously inventive things in the last couple of years. It would be great to get that out there and discuss it and see whether, what the flexibility is between the large houses and between the small companies and what we can learn from each other.
I'm not sure whether I'm going to thank you for that suggestion, Mary. I think the smaller companies might well grab the opportunity. I just hope they're not listening on YouTube. But look, I mean, I would also like to congratulate you on the Clemente di Tito, which I've seen, and which is a fantastic example of creativity under changed circumstances of lockdown, not just in terms of Gaetanu's direction, but also in your having to recast it with young Norwegian singers who are terrific. I mean, yes, and also, of course, you're able to use a local, extremely high quality orchestra, but it is a really good example. And if you look at it, there is not a lot of scenery there. And there are sort of some marked out things on the ground where you can't go nearer than 2 meters to wherever the person is you ought to be stabbing or embracing. But it is, I didn't feel shortchanged by that production at all. And I do think it is an example of we may be need to think what is required for a co-production or a production at all. So I think your points are good ones. And of course, yes, I will willingly hand over the reins of the conference.
I believe that when I see it, Nicholas. Thank you.
Well, look, I think the other very important thing that you raised, and it has come out of a number of other comments by Sophie and Guy and others, is, and in a way it also comes out of what Paddy was saying at the beginning, is part of the answer to this should come from the creatives. You know, what do they want about it? And if I were being provocative, which of course I never would be, one of the reasons we make co-productions is that if you can get hold of Janikov or Herheim or Valikovsky, or, you know, one of these much in-demand directors, it may be the only way of doing it is by a 4 or 5 way co-production. That is one less opportunity for a young director.
Interesting.
Do we have time for one more question? Okay, let's keep to time. If there aren't any more questions, I'm just going to very briefly sum up by saying, it looks to me as if co-productions aren't dead yet, which is probably just as well, since we have a co-production marketplace tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, which might otherwise be an empty room. But I do think that all of you have come up with interesting thoughts about how they may change. And in a way, I think the most encouraging aspect of that is that you, and Valentí said it very well, you are questioning what is the purpose of this co-production? Is it just, okay, let's make a co-production, we'll try and get as many people on board to keep the costs down, which we all know never quite works because other costs are incurred? Or what is the core purpose of this kind of artistic collaboration? And the second conclusion well, is it third one I would like to make is, I urge everyone to be thinking green when they are making co-productions. And I think almost the most important point that Paddy made at the beginning is about the urgency of it. It's not just about appointing a sustainability officer, although I can see the temptation of doing one when she's called Julie Fuchs. And I'm sure she will be a force for good in Amsterdam. But it's about acting on it now. There is a time scale in opera production before something happens, but unless you get the director and the designer and the technicians and the other creatives into the room at the beginning, you're not going to change it. And now is our opportunity to do it. I think we would like to have a short break. Audrey, 25 minutes, would you say?
Perfect.
For refreshment or just
emails.
Rebooting your machine. And we will be back at 4:15 to look at how we renew our theatres, I hope. Thank you all very much.
See you later.